A piercing wail cut through the compound. It was the kind of scream that sent a chill down the spine of anyone who heard it, the kind that carried raw, unfiltered terror. "They are not back. Where's our children?" a woman cried out, her voice cracking with panic. Once upon a time, in a city called Onitsha, there was a yard with so many tenants. It was not just a collection of rooms. It was a home filled with laughter, love, and the comforting sounds of everyday life. Children ran barefoot across the compound, their giggles blending with the chatter of women who sat under the old mango tree, peeling yams and exchanging stories. The men gathered every evenings, drinking palm wine, playing drafts, and talking about the struggles of life. Everyone in the yard lived like one big family. Doors were always open, meals were shared, and a child belonged to every mother, not just the one who gave birth to them. It was a place of peace. Then one evening, a new tenant arrived. She was a woman in her early 30s, tall and slim, with dark skin that glowed under the fading light. She carried no luggage, no boxes, no sign that she was moving in. Just a single mattress balanced on her head. The landlord, a round-bellied man with a deep voice, introduced her briefly. "This is our new tenant," he said, gesturing toward the last vacant room at the end of the yard. "She will be staying here." And that was it. No one asked where she had come from or why she had so little. People in the yard trusted easily. She moved in quietly, without fuss. No one saw her arranging anything, because there was nothing to arrange. She had no stove, no table, no clothesline. At first, people whispered about her. A young woman, alone, with no husband, no children, no belongings. It was strange, but she was polite, soft-spoken, and always had a warm smile. She was the real definition of a good woman. Before long, the yard embraced her. She helped the women shell beans, laughed with the men when they told their evening jokes, and watched over the younger children as they played. At times mothers left their children under her care, and she never complained. But there was something odd about her. No one had ever entered her room. She never left the door open, never invited anyone in, never asked for anything. And no one noticed. Not then. Then came the day she asked the children to follow her. It was a bright afternoon. The children were playing, their laughter echoing across the yard. She sat nearby, watching them with a soft smile. Then, in the most casual way, she spoke. "Michael, Sarah, David, Emma, James, will you follow me to the market? I need to buy something." There was no hesitation, no second thought. Of course, they would follow her. She was auntie, just like all the other adults in the yard. They skipped beside her, excited. They imagined the roasted groundnuts she might buy, the sweets she would let them choose. At first, everything seemed normal, until they passed the market. David, the oldest at 11, was the first to notice. "Auntie," he said, slowing his steps, "we passed the market." She smiled. "I know. We are going somewhere else first." Something about her voice made his stomach tighten. He stopped walking. His mother was strict. If she returned home late, there would be trouble. "I want to go back," he said. She stopped too, looked at him. Her smile never faded, but something shifted in her eyes. "Okay, go home now and tell their mothers that I am with them," she said calmly. The boy nodded his head, turned and ran, his heart pounding. He didn't look back. Didn't see the way the woman's fingers tightened around Sarah's wrist. Didn't see the way the other children hesitated, confused, uncertain. Didn't see how they disappeared into the moving crowd of Onitsha's busy streets. David ran back through the crowded streets of Onitsha, his small legs carrying him as fast as they could. The sun was beginning to sink lower. As he approached the yard, he slowed his steps, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He had been lucky. If he had stayed any longer, his mother would have scolded him for wandering off too far. He pushed open the rusty gate and stepped into the compound, breathing in the familiar smells of home: firewood smoke, the scent of freshly fried akara, and the ever-present dust that swirled in the air. The women were still gathered under the mango tree, peeling vegetables and sharing stories about their husbands and children. The men were still seated outside their rooms, some shirtless, chatting about politics and the rising cost of food. The younger children were still playing, their laughter echoing through the yard. David smiled. He had made it back just in time to rejoin the game. He spotted a group of boys playing with an old, half-deflated football near the far end of the yard and ran toward them, kicking up little clouds of dust as he went. "David, where did you go?" one of the boys asked as he joined the game. "I followed Ani to the market," he said breathlessly, his eyes fixed on the ball. "But I came back before we got there. I didn't want my mother to beat me." The other boys laughed, and just like that, the conversation ended. David had already forgotten about it. He was too focused on the game, on the way the ball felt against his bare feet, on the excitement of running, dodging, and scoring. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing felt wrong. It was just another evening in the yard. As night crept in, the air grew cooler, and one by one, mothers began calling their children home. Lucy, Sarah's mother, wiped her hands on her wrapper and turned to the other women. "Where are the children?" she asked. "They went to the market with Auntie," one of the women replied casually. "David said so." Lucy turned to David, who was still kicking the ball with his friends. "David," she called. He stopped playing and jogged over to her, breathing heavily. "Where is Sarah?" she asked, frowning. David shrugged. "She went with Auntie." "And Emma?" "She went too." "They all went." Lucy frowned. "But it's late." David looked up at the sky. The sun had disappeared, replaced by the dim glow of streetlights flickering beyond the yard's walls. He hadn't realized how much time had passed. "But they should be back by now," Lucy muttered, glancing at the other women. "Why aren't they back?" A ripple of concern passed through the group. It was true. The market wasn't far. Even if they had stopped to buy things, they should have returned long before nightfall. The yard was a place of routine. Children were never out this late, not without their parents. One by one, other mothers began to notice the absence of their children. "Where is Michael? Where is James? Where is Emma?" Their voices overlapped, concern turning into worry. "But David said they went with Auntie," someone pointed out. All eyes turned to him again. David shifted uncomfortably under their gaze. He had answered honestly. He had told them exactly what he knew. But now, standing in the growing darkness, an uneasy feeling curled in his stomach. He didn't know where they were. A piercing wail cut through the compound. It was the kind of scream that sent a chill down the spine of anyone who heard it, the kind that carried raw, unfiltered terror. "They are not back," a woman cried out, her voice cracking with panic. Maybe they are still buying something. But what could they be buying for this long? The mothers who had been relaxed minutes ago were no longer at ease. Lucy turned to one of the younger women in the yard, Rachel. "Let's go to the market," she said. "See if we can find them." Rachel nodded and quickly tied her scarf, hurrying out of the yard and disappearing down the street. More parents joined the small gathering under the mango tree, drawn by the worried voices. Fathers who had been playing drafts abandoned their game, sensing that something wasn't right. The mood in the yard had changed, and the once lively compound fell into an eerie silence. They waited and waited, but Rachel didn't return with good news. Instead, when she finally came back, her face was pale, her forehead damp with sweat. "They're not there," she said breathlessly. "I searched the whole market. I asked the traders. No one saw them." The yard froze. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, the silence shattered. "They are not there? Where could they be? Where is that woman?" Panic spread like wildfire. And just like that, the peace that had always existed in the yard was gone. The yard was no longer the peaceful home it had always been. Worry thickened the air, wrapping around the tenants like an invisible grip, tightening with every second that passed. The women, who had once gossiped freely under the mango tree, now stood huddled together, their voices tense and urgent. The men, who had once sat leisurely outside their rooms, now paced, their brows furrowed with concern. The children were missing, and no one knew where they had gone. It was Michael's father, Daniel, who first voiced the thought that was creeping into everyone's mind. "Where is that woman?" A heavy silence followed. Lucy, her arms folded tightly against her chest, turned to David, her voice now sharper. "David, when you left them, did Ani say where she was taking them?" David swallowed. He felt a cold unease settle in his belly. "She just said we were going somewhere else first," he mumbled. I told her I wanted to go home, and she let me. The weight of his own words sank into him. She let him go, but she didn't let the others. The yard erupted into chaos. Go and knock on her door. Maybe she brought them back already. She must be inside. The mothers rushed toward the woman's room, their wrappers flying behind them, their faces set in desperation. The men followed closely, their footsteps heavy with anger. Someone knocked. No answer. Another knock. This time louder, harder. Still, nothing. Daniel, now burning with panic, slammed his fist against the wooden door. Open this door now, he roared. No response. Then, without warning, he took a step back and rammed his shoulder against the door. The old wood groaned but didn't give way. The other men joined him, pounding, kicking, shoving until, bang, the door burst open. The women screamed. The men stood frozen. The room was empty, completely empty. No mattress, no clothes, no belongings, nothing. It was as if no one had ever lived there. It was as if the woman had never existed. A stunned silence fell over the yard. Lucy stepped forward, her hands trembling, her breath shallow. This can't be, she whispered. She's gone, Daniel muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. She took them, someone gasped. The words slammed into the yard like a hammer. And then, the screams began. Mothers wailed, dropping to their knees, clutching at their wrappers, pulling at their hair. My child, where is my baby? Emma's mother, Olivia, staggered backward, clutching her chest as though she had been struck. Her legs gave way, and she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. Sarah's father, a quiet, soft-spoken man named Henry, clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He was shaking, his entire body tense with rage. She played us, he hissed. She fooled all of us. The weight of their trust crushed them. They had welcomed her. They had let their children follow her. And now, she had vanished with them. It was reported to the police station, and after 24 hours, police came to the yard. A black van pulled up outside the yard, and 3 officers stepped out, their expressions grim. Daniel wasted no time. Officer, a woman kidnapped our children, he said, his voice hoarse from shouting. She packed into this yard just a few months ago. We trusted her. She took 4 children, said she was going to the market. But now, she's gone. The lead officer, a tall man with sharp eyes, looked around the yard, taking in the tear-streaked faces, the broken door, the unmistakable weight of fear hanging over everyone. Did she leave anything behind? A note? Any clue as to where she might have gone? Nothing, Henry said bitterly. She was never really here. The officer sighed. Do you have her full name? Silence. No one knew. They had simply called her Auntie. The officer exchanged glances with his men. We'll need a description of her appearance. And we'll put out an alert immediately. What if it's too late? Lucy cried. What if she's already taken them far away? The officer met her gaze, his expression unreadable. We'll do everything we can to find them. But the words felt empty. The yard had already lost its faith. Many things like that had been happening in the country. No one slept that night. The yard, once filled with laughter and warmth, was now a place of sorrow. The mothers sat on the cold ground, holding each other, whispering their children's names like prayers. The fathers stood near the broken door, silent, staring into the darkness, as if willing their children to walk back through the gate. David lay awake on his mother's mat, staring at the ceiling, his heart pounding with guilt. He had walked away. He had left them. And now, they were gone. Tears slid down his face, but he didn't wipe them away. Because deep down, he knew, nothing would ever be the same again. The yard was drowning in grief. Fathers paced back and forth, their faces set in stone, their minds racing through 100 thoughts at once. Where could she have taken them? How far had she gone? Were the children safe? Mothers sat on the bare ground, their wrappers clutched tightly around their trembling bodies. Some rocked back and forth, murmuring prayers under their breath. Others simply stared blankly into the night, as if hoping that if they stared long enough, their children would appear. But they didn't. They were gone, and the silence of their absence was suffocating. David couldn't sleep. His mother, Grace, sat on the edge of their thin mattress, her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes red and swollen. She hadn't spoken much since the police left, except to whisper Sarah's mother's name in quiet consolation. David lay on his back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sobs of the mothers outside. He felt like he couldn't breathe. It was as if something heavy was pressing down on his chest, crushing him, stealing the air from his lungs. Because he knew. If he had said something earlier, if he had realized something was wrong before now, maybe, just maybe, the adults could have stopped it. But he hadn't known. When they asked him where the children were, he had answered without a single worry in his heart. He had kicked his football and laughed with his friends while the others were being led away. By the time he understood, it was too late. A deep sob threatened to escape his throat, but he bit it back. He clenched his fists against the mattress, his nails digging into his palms. Crying wouldn't change anything. Crying wouldn't bring them back. The night was long, but the dawn was worse. Morning came with the weight of harsh reality, flooding the yard with golden light that felt painfully out of place. The sun had no right to shine when their world had turned dark. Neighbors from nearby compounds began arriving, drawn by the wail of tragedy. They stood outside the gate in hushed voices, their faces filled with shock and pity. 4 children gone? Just like that? But how? They say she had nothing in her room, not even a single cup. As the news spread, more people came. Some brought food, though no one in the yard had an appetite. Others offered words of comfort, though no words could fill the aching void. The landlord arrived just before noon, his usually confident stride now hesitant. "I swear I didn't know anything about her," he insisted, his voice defensive as he faced the furious parents. "She told me she needed a place to stay, and she paid 3 months' rent up front. Didn't you ask for her full name?" Lucy spat, her voice sharp with anger. "She told me her name was Anna," the landlord muttered, shifting uncomfortably. "That's all I know." "Anna what?" Michael's father, Daniel, demanded. The landlord swallowed hard. "She never told me." A bitter laugh escaped Henry's lips. "So you let a stranger into our yard without even knowing her real name?" The landlord wiped sweat from his forehead. "She seemed decent. How was I supposed to know she was? A kidnapper?" Olivia cut in, her voice breaking. "How were you supposed to know? How about doing your job as a landlord? How about making sure the person you let into our yard wasn't a monster?" The landlord had no answer, and no one cared, because his regret meant nothing, not when their children were missing. By the afternoon, more officers arrived. They searched the woman's empty room, but there was nothing to be found. No notes, no belongings, not even a scrap of paper with a clue. They questioned every tenant, gathering descriptions of the woman. "She was tall, dark-skinned, slim," Lucy said, her voice trembling. "She always wore long dresses," Rachel added. "And she smiled a lot. She was friendly." The officer nodded, scribbling in his notepad. "Did anyone ever see her speaking to a man? A visitor? Did she have friends?" Silence. The tenants exchanged glances. "No," Daniel said finally. "She was always alone." The officer frowned. "That's unusual." Unusual. That word sat heavy in the air, because everything about this woman had been unusual, and no one had noticed. Not until it was too late. The police promised they would do everything possible to find the children. Flyers were printed with their names and descriptions. Sarah, 6 years old, with thick braids tied in blue ribbons. Michael, 7 years old, with a gap between his front teeth. Emma, 5 years old, with round cheeks and dimples. James, 6 years old, always wearing his favorite red sandals. And David read their names over and over again, his stomach twisting with guilt, because his name wasn't on that list, because he had made it home, and they hadn't. The search began that day. The police moved fast, setting up roadblocks, questioning traders, showing people pictures of the missing children. But in the chaos of the city, in the crowded streets of Onitsha where people moved like waves in the ocean, the woman had vanished, without a trace. The days passed like a slow-moving nightmare. Each morning, the parents woke up with the same prayer on their lips. Let today be the day we find them. And each night, they went to bed with the same crushing emptiness. The police had intensified their search. Flyers were plastered on walls, pinned to shop windows, handed out at motor parks. Officers questioned bus drivers, market women, street hawkers, anyone who might have seen a woman leading 4 children away. But Onitsha was a city of movement. Every day, thousands of people came and went, and somewhere among them, swallowed by the crowds, was the woman, with their children. David barely spoke. He had stopped playing with his friends, stopped eating more than a few bites of food, stopped smiling. At night, he dreamed of them, Sarah, Michael, Emma, and James. He saw them walking ahead of him, their laughter ringing through the streets. He ran after them, calling their names. But every time he reached out, they vanished, and in their place stood her, the woman. Her smile was different now, no longer warm, no longer friendly. Now, it was sharp, cold. David would wake up shaking, his heart pounding against his ribs, his mother whispering prayers beside him. He never told her what he saw, but deep inside, he felt it. They were out there somewhere, and he couldn't stop thinking about them. Olivia, Emma's mother, had been the first to break. One morning, she packed a small bag, wrapped a scarf tightly around her head, and left the yard. No one saw her for 2 days. When she returned, her feet were swollen from walking, her clothes dust-stained, her eyes hollow. "I went to the villages," she whispered, her voice barely there. "I checked every motor park, every market. I asked everyone I met. I begged them to tell me if they had seen my daughter." The yard listened in silence. She had found nothing. "They are hiding her," she said, a strange fire burning in her sunken eyes. "Someone is hiding her." Sarah's mother, Lucy, placed a hand on Olivia's shoulder. "We'll find them," she whispered. "We have to." But even as she spoke, her voice wavered. Because how do you promise something when you don't know if it's true? It was 2 weeks after the children had disappeared when the first real clue surfaced. A trader from the main market came to the yard, her face alight with urgency. "I saw your flyer," she told the parents. "I think I saw that woman." The yard erupted into motion. When? Where? Did she have the children with her? The woman nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Yes. It was the day after they went missing. She came to my stall with 4 children. I remember because the little girl, Sarah, I think, was crying." Lucy gasped. The woman continued. "I asked her why the girl was crying, and she said the child was just tired from traveling. But something felt off." Daniel, Michael's father, gripped the woman's arm. Where were they going? The woman hesitated. She asked for the price of travel bags. "Big ones." I told her, and she left. I didn't see her again after that. A new kind of fear settled over the parents. She had been buying travel bags. Was she planning to leave Onitsha? Were their children already gone? That night, Henry, Sarah's father, made a decision. He would search for her himself. The police were doing their best, but it wasn't enough. If this woman was planning to leave the city, then time was running out. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Henry packed a bag, took all the money he had saved, and left. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. Because he didn't know. All he knew was that he wasn't coming back until he found his daughter, or until he had answers. The yard had become a place of silence. Days had turned into weeks, and with each passing sunset, hope thinned like a fading candlelight. The mothers barely spoke, their bodies moving through each day like ghosts. The fathers sat outside at night, staring at the gates, listening, always listening, for news that never came. The police came often, asking more questions, promising they were working on it. But what did that even mean? It had been too long. Too many nights of waiting, of dreaming about the children, only to wake up to the same unbearable emptiness. Then, on a quiet evening, just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, 2 police officers entered the yard. At first, no one noticed them. Then one of the women, Mary, the widow from the first room, saw the uniforms and gasped. "Officers," she called, her voice trembling. Heads turned. Mothers rushed forward. Fathers stood up, their hearts pounding. Lucy gripped her wrapper tightly, her stomach twisting. Could this be it? The lead officer, a tall man with sharp features and tired eyes, cleared his throat. We have found her. The yard erupted in noise, gasps, shouts, cries of disbelief. Lucy's hands flew to her mouth. Olivia clutched the edge of the wall for support. Michael's father, Daniel, stepped forward. His voice was hoarse. Where? Where is she? The officer's eyes swept over the desperate faces. Lagos, he said. Silence. The weight of that word settled over them. Lagos? A different city? Hours away? The woman had taken their children that far? Sarah's mother, Lucy, felt her knees weaken. Are they alive? The officer's gaze softened. Yes, he said. We found them alive. And that was it. The yard broke into wails. Mothers collapsed onto the ground, pounding their fists against the earth as sobs racked their bodies. Fathers covered their faces, some shaking their heads in relief, others wiping away silent tears. The grief of the past weeks burst open all at once, flowing like a river that had been held back for too long. Sarah's mother trembled violently. Sarah is alive, she whispered. Sarah is alive. And still, she could not believe it. The police explained everything. For weeks, they had searched every corner of Anambra State, following the smallest hints. But there had been nothing. Then, after expanding their investigation, they found a witness, a market woman in Asaba. She had seen a woman traveling with 4 children. The woman had been careful, but the market seller had noticed something strange. The children were too quiet, too scared. And one of them, a little girl, had been crying. That had been Sarah. The police had followed the trail, moving from city to city. A bus driver in Benin remembered them. A roadside food vendor in or had served them a meal. The woman had been moving constantly. She had known they would come for her. But her mistake, her final mistake, was trying to rent a new apartment in Lagos. She had gone to a landlord, asking for a small place to stay. The landlord had asked for identification. She had none. When she hesitated, the landlord became suspicious. He asked her who owns the children, and she said they were hers. Then he remembered the news he saw about the missing children in Onitsha and Anambra State. So he told the woman to come the next day for them to conclude everything about the house. When the woman left, he called the police. And when they raided her hiding place, they found the children. Not just 4 children, but many other children. Some were those she took from their schools. The next morning, the parents gathered their things. None of them could sit still. Lucy could barely breathe. She was going to see Sarah. Sarah, who had been missing for months. Sarah, whom she had imagined in the worst places, in the worst hands. Now, she was only a few hours away from holding her again. The police arranged a vehicle, and the parents piled in. The road stretched before them, endless and unforgiving. The hum of the engine filled the silence, but inside, their hearts screamed. Every second felt too long. Every breath felt wasted. Lucy clenched her fists in her lap, her nails digging into her palm. What if Sarah had changed? What if she was too scared to recognize her? What if? She swallowed hard. No, she had to stay strong. For Sarah. For all of them. When they arrived in Lagos, the police led them into a station. The air smelled of paper, sweat, and something unnameable, something heavy. Lucy's legs felt unsteady. Then the door opened, and she saw her. Sarah stood there, her small frame thinner than before, her face tired. Her hair was rough, her dress wrinkled, but she was alive. Lucy let out a sob, and then, "Mommy!" Sarah ran. Lucy dropped to her knees just in time to catch her, wrapping her arms around her daughter and holding her as tightly as she could. Tears streamed down her face, soaking into Sarah's hair as she kissed her forehead over and over again. My baby," she wept. Sarah clung to her, her small hands gripping her mother's clothes. "Mommy, I thought you wouldn't find me," she whispered. Lucy's chest broke open. She pulled back just enough to cup Sarah's face, her thumbs wiping away the streaks of dirt. "I would always find you," she said. Always. Nearby, the other parents were having their own moments. Emma buried her face in Olivia's chest. Michael wept into Daniel's arms. James held on to his mother like he would never let go. Other children from other places stared at them. Some couldn't remember where they came from. It was over. They had them back. And as Lucy pressed her forehead against Sarah's, she realized the nightmare had finally ended. Or had it? Because in the corner of the room, sitting between two officers, was her, the woman. And when Lucy's gaze met hers, a cold smile crept onto the woman's lips, as if she wasn't afraid, as if she had won something. Lucy's blood ran cold, because suddenly, she wasn't sure if the worst was truly over. Lucy's breath caught in her throat. The woman sat there, her hands cuffed, her face calm, too calm. Her eyes flickered over the room, taking in the weeping parents, the trembling children, the uniformed officers standing beside her. And then she smiled. It wasn't a wide smile. It wasn't the grin of someone who had been caught and broken. No, it was small, subtle, mocking. Lucy's hands curled into fists. How dare she smile after everything she had done? The officers must have noticed the change in the air because one of them, a short, broad-shouldered man, stepped forward and cleared his throat. This woman, he said, his voice firm, has finally confessed to her crimes. A hush fell over the room. The parents turned toward him, waiting, hearts pounding. Lucy didn't blink. She wanted to hear it from the woman herself. She wanted to know why. The officer continued. Her name is Evelyn Ease, 33 years old. She has been doing this for a long time, moving from city to city, school to school, pretending to be a tenant and a mother, earning people's trust, and then disappearing with their children. Gasps filled the room. Lucy felt a wave of nausea hit her. She's done this before, someone whispered. The officer nodded. Yes, we have traced at least 3 other cases to her. In each case, she would take the children and sell them to interested buyers. A cry of horror rang out from one of the mothers. Lucy's knees weakened. If she had been a little later, if the police hadn't caught her in time, Sarah could have been gone forever. Her stomach twisted. You sell them? Daniel's voice was thick with rage. You steal children and sell them like objects? The woman, Evelyn, tilted her head. Her dark eyes met his. And then, she spoke. You act like I had a choice. Her voice was soft, steady, too steady. She leaned back in her chair, the metal cuffs clinking lightly. I needed to survive, she said simply, and I found a way. A murmur of disgust rippled through the room. You found a way? Olivia spat, her hands shaking. By stealing innocent children? By breaking families? Evelyn didn't flinch. She just sighed, as if she was tired of explaining herself. You people don't understand, she murmured. You never will. She looked down at her fingers, examining them as if she wasn't in a police station, as if she hadn't destroyed lives. Then, in a voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, she said, I was once one of them, you know? A child taken from a yard just like yours. Silence. The room seemed to shrink. No one breathed. No one moved. I was 6, Evelyn continued, taken from my home by a woman I trusted. She told me we were going to the market, just like I told your children. Lucy's heart pounded. No, she would not feel sorry for this woman, not after what she had done. Evelyn smirked, as if she could hear Lucy's thoughts. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late, she said. I was sold, moved from house to house, given different names, until one day, I stopped being a stolen child. She looked up then, her dark eyes gleaming, and I became the thief. Evelyn's confession was recorded. She did not beg for forgiveness. She did not ask for mercy. She simply told her story, like someone recounting an ordinary life. When the interrogation ended, the police informed the parents that she would be taken to court, where she would face the full weight of the law. But Lucy wasn't sure if that was enough. As she watched Evelyn being led away, something inside her whispered that this wasn't over. Because even as she was dragged from the room, Evelyn Ease smiled, and Lucy knew. This wasn't just a case. This was a war. By morning, the whole of Onitsha was buzzing with Evelyn Ease's arrest. People gathered in small clusters, whispering in hushed voices, shaking their heads in disbelief. A woman? And she was living among them like family? What kind of heart does she have? Did you hear? She has been doing this for years. Everywhere, There were murmurs of outrage, horror, and disbelief. But for the parents in the yard, the world outside no longer mattered. Their children were back, but the scars of those lost weeks still lingered. Nightmares, sudden bursts of tears, the fear in their eyes whenever they saw a stranger. And then there was Lucy. She hadn't slept properly since returning from Lagos. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Evelyn's face. That smile, it haunted her, and it made her wonder, did Evelyn truly think she had one? The day of the trial arrived. The parents traveled to the courthouse, their hearts heavy with emotions they couldn't name. Lucy sat at the front, her hands gripping Sarah's tiny fingers. Evelyn was led into the courtroom, her hands still bound in cuffs. She didn't look around. She didn't search for sympathy. She simply walked with a straight back, her expression unreadable, as if she had already made peace with whatever was coming. The judge entered, the courtroom rose, and the proceedings began. The prosecutor spoke first. "Your Honor, we are dealing with a criminal whose actions have destroyed families. This woman did not just kidnap children. She trafficked them. She sold them like objects. She deceived parents, gained their trust, and snatched their most precious gifts." Murmurs of anger swept through the courtroom. The prosecutor continued, "We have gathered evidence, testimonies, and her own confession. There is no question of her guilt. The only question is, how severe should her punishment be?" A pause. Then Evelyn's lawyer stood. She had a lawyer. That fact alone made Lucy's stomach turn. The lawyer was a middle-aged man with thick glasses. He adjusted them before he spoke. "Your Honor," he began, "while my client admits to these acts, I ask that the court consider her history. She was a victim before she became a criminal. Taken as a child, raised in the shadows of human trafficking. She never knew a normal life. She never knew love. She only learned how to survive." Lucy's chest tightened. She wanted to feel something for Evelyn's past. She really did. But then she looked at Sarah, at the dark circles under her daughter's eyes, at the way she still flinched at sudden movements, and her heart hardened. Nothing excused what Evelyn had done, and she needed to pay. The trial dragged on for hours. The judge listened. The parents testified. Evidence was presented. The judge listened. The parents testified. Evidence was presented. Evelyn sat through it all in silence. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the judge finally spoke. "Evelyn Ease," he said, "you have admitted to your crimes. You have taken children from their families, from their schools, caused unimaginable pain, and sold human lives for profit." He paused, letting the words sink in. "This court finds you guilty of multiple counts of child trafficking, kidnapping, and fraud. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." A gasp. The courtroom erupted into noise. Some people cheered. Others wept. Lucy felt her legs give way as she sank into her seat, a sob of relief escaping her lips. It was over. It was truly over. Evelyn was led away. And this time, she did not smile. Life did not return to normal immediately. The children needed therapy. The parents struggled to erase the fear that had settled deep in their bones. But with time, the laughter in the yard returned. Children played again. Mothers smiled again. And though the scars remained, they learned to live with them. Lucy often watched Sarah as she slept, brushing a hand over her daughter's forehead. She had almost lost her only child, a testament to her motherhood. But she was here now, safe. And as the days passed, Lucy promised herself one thing. She would never let her guard down again. Because monsters did not always lurk in the dark. Sometimes, they lived right next door. Dear parents, never assume that danger is far away. The greatest threat sometimes comes from those who earn your trust. Watch over your children, know where they are, and teach them to be cautious. Evil does not always come with a warning. It often comes with a smile. Hello, champions. I hope you enjoyed our stories. Please hit the like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks.